Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a great lunch. So as we kind of discussed earlier, as many of you know, the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment will be due again with your FY23 Perkins application. And so today we are pleased to welcome our colleagues from the Office of Community College Research and Leadership, or OCCRL, here today to revisit the CLNA to help you prepare for that process again. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Marcy Rocky and the OCCRL team.
Thank you, Janelle. Welcome back, everybody, from lunch. I know that you're excited to jump into the CLNA once again with us at OCCRL. And as mentioned, I'm Marcy Rocky. I'm the Assistant Director for Community College Relations and Research, and I'll have my colleagues also introduce themselves. So Nicole, you want to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nicole Del Mastro Jeffrey. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student working with OCCRL as a research assistant. Happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Anjali Welton, but you can also call me AJ, that's my nickname. And I'm a faculty affiliate at OCCRL and a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis.
Thank you. And of course, we're under the leadership of Dr. Ebony Zamani Gallagher. And so while she had overlapping commitments right now during this time frame, also contributed to our presentation and the discussion that we're going to have today, and we'll be participating throughout the Forum for Excellence as well. So we'll go ahead and move into revisiting the CLNA. And I know, we're familiar with many of you, but if you're not familiar with OCCRL, essentially, we look at policies, programs, and practices to enhance outcomes for diverse youth and adults who seek to transition to and through college to employment. And again, for those of you that are familiar with us, you'll recognize these different pillars in terms of the work that we do, where we look at public engagement, transformative leadership, equity-driven change, and then comprehensive P20 educational pathways. And of course, these all connect very well to what we're talking about today with the CLNA. So that's a little bit about OCCRL as we move forward. And so just a brief overview of our presentation today. We're going to revisit the CLNA in 2021 as you launch this process that you started a couple years ago. And of course, a lot has happened, right? And so we have a lot to think about as we revisit this and look at our state context, the labor market context. And so we'll do a little refresher in terms of the different aspects of the CLNA as you're approaching them. But really, this is largely going to be interactive. And so what we really want to do is help you all learn from each other. And also at OCCRL, with the support of ICCB, we're going to be offering some support and professional development throughout the coming academic year as you're engaging in this second round of the CLNA. And so, this is informative for us too, as we think about how we can be supportive in your efforts and the kinds of professional development and assistance that will be helpful to you. And so since this is very interactive, I know earlier, we were kind of talking, if you do prefer to adjust, your name or anything on your Zoom as you're going to be engaging with your colleagues, please feel free to do that. Because as I said, it'll be very interactive and we want this to be centered a lot on some discussions in breakout groups and then larger groups as well. And so we remember very well when we were starting the first round of the CLNA. It was a cold day in March, and we were wrapping up our Equity Academy at Kaskaskia College. And after that, everything started to shut down. And we all experienced, right, this transition, a lot of uncertainty. And here we are today as we look back really on the last 18 months. And again, want to center our conversation on all the things that we've learned, and also the importance of centering equity as you engage in the CLNA. And so, as we know, it was important before, but again, we've had a lot of change. We've had to pivot many times and adjust. And so we want to give some time and space for people to talk and learn and think about what we do moving forward to advance equity in the state of Illinois, specifically and in your context. And so when we think about the state of Illinois, recently the strategic plan for higher education came out from the Illinois Board of Higher Education, of course, in partnership and consultation with ICCB, as well as other state agencies, but really thinking about what's our overall strategic plan for higher education in Illinois. And so we want to just highlight the equity imperative. And in particular, looking at what we need to create a thriving state and what our higher education system needs to do in order to do that, to have a more equitable reality. And so really this plan, looking at data centers on African-American, Latinx, low-income students, rural students, and working adults that have long been left behind, largely from our higher education systems. And so that's where we see these significant equity gaps when we think about income inequality, when we think about educational access and attainment. And so together, how do we change that? Illinois has the diverse human capital base to drive economic growth and a higher education system that ensures a diverse workforce that has the tools necessary to lead our growing economy. And so again, just centering educational equity and economic growth, that those are inseparable. And so when we think about our overall state plan, we really want you to think about, in particular, we understand that you're working with Perkins special populations, but we also want you to put this in the context of our state goals and also how your own district and your region contributes to these state goals and what you see at the local level and what you can do to advance equity specifically for these particular populations. And also think about the intersection within these populations, right? So thinking about how these relate to each other and for our students or for those individuals that fall into multiple, right, of these categories and also into special populations. So really thinking about that as we have this conversation on revisiting the CLNA. And so as part of this strategic plan, they do highlight the importance of our community college system. And so this isn't, again, we're not going to go into detail on the whole plan, and we have a link at the end if you'd like to read it, if you haven't already. But essentially, when we think about the CLNA, this is really an opportunity when we look at this particular goal, right, where we want to align economic development and higher education strategies to address historic inequities. And so again, the CLNA is an opportunity, right, to create these new partnerships or to strengthen existing regional partnerships for these overall goals that we have across the state. And so, again, we understand that demanding is an understatement of what it's been like recently for all of you. But when we shift from thinking about sort of, we have the CLNA, we have to go through this process, we're required to complete it, but really looking at it as an opportunity. So this is an opportunity to engage stakeholders. This is an opportunity to center conversations on equity. This is an opportunity to think about innovative new partnerships that meet the needs of learners whose needs haven't been historically met before. And also to think about economic development in our regions and what that looks like moving forward on how we can, again, collaborate. So the CLNA is a natural opportunity for collaboration to support this overall goal. And also the plan points to the strength of our community college system in particular. So as you know, community colleges have, right, this sort of unique place where we sit as the connection often between all these different systems. So when we think about our K-12 system, we think about, transferring into universities, we think about workforce development, employers, we all really sit at that connection point. And so this can be a way to leverage those connections to have some meaningful discussion that's followed by action. And so when we think about our CLNA and kind of a refresher, again, we'll have some conversation about where you left off in that first round that was disrupted at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. But, again, just kind of a refresher, if you're revisiting this document and the template, the key components include student performance data, size, scope, and quality as defined by the state plan, labor market alignment, progress toward implementing CTE programs of study, recruitment, retention, and training of faculty and staff, and then what progress you're making toward improving access and equity. And so Dr. Welton is gonna go a little bit more detail into these different areas as we do this kind of refresher on the CLNA, but we're gonna transition into a video shortly. It's about 7 minutes long. And I'm not sure, some of you might be familiar with the PBS Work Shift series, but really it highlights a lot of how the pandemic has impacted how we think about the labor market and also college and career readiness, and particularly for the skilled trades. And so putting it into context. And so we're going to transition into the video, but we do want you to utilize the chat box because we'd like for you to just kind of have a conversation or share, how far into these areas did you get in your first completion cycle? Because again, we know that that was disrupted. And so we just kind of want to hear from all of you in terms of when you approach the CLNA in the first round, how far did you get? And that'll help us as we move forward with our conversation today. So feel free to share that in the chat box. And I'll transition into our video.
There is a shortage of skilled tradespeople throughout the U.S. economy, a persistent problem that started well before the pandemic. But given high unemployment, it is an important time to explore what's behind that gap and what can be done about it. Paul Solomon has a story for our series, Work Shift, which focuses on navigating the job market in a post-COVID economy.
Superstar Seattle, where the high-tech young make 6 figures and up.
Okay, going in.
But you can make that much in low-tech too, says plumber Vinny Spizzari.
Drain cleaning, light plumbing repairs, and that kind of thing. We've got guys making over $100,000 a year.
Spizzari owns Seattle's Mr. Rooter franchise.
I've got plumbers that work for me today that make $200,000 plus a year.
And they're what age?
Any age in their 30s, 40s.
Making $200,000 a year or more.
Absolutely.
That's because there simply aren't enough plumbers. Not in boom towns like Seattle, not anywhere.
Manpower is one of the most frustrating parts of my job, filling all the spots. I could hire 6, 8 experienced plumbers right now.
But they're just not out there?
They're just not out there. Guys that are my age, they're aging out.
But why aren't they being replaced with the young, given their historically low labor participation rate, made worse by the pandemic?
There are all these kids who either aren't working at all or are working in dead-end, low-wage jobs. Why can't you just say to them, hey, by the age of 25 or 30, you can be making 6 figures. Just come with me.
I would love to. I've gone to some career days. The kids, you're waiting for them to come talk to you, and they just don't.
So why no takers?
First and foremost is the perception of plumbing. Got the cutters right here?
Oh, yeah.
Trevor Caldwell is Vinny Spizzari's right-hand man.
There's this stigma that goes along with getting your hands dirty. Just a plumber, not a person, just a plumber. And I don't want to be that guy.
Or that gal.
You're doing manual labor. Some people tend to look down on that. And that makes people not want to go into it, clearly.
Sarah Schnabel isn't a plumber, but an Ithaca, New York electrical apprentice.
Oh, there we go.
Another well-paying trade which can't find good help these days. A frustration for Schnabel's boss, Brian Lamort, and for his colleagues.
I know lots of guys in the trade who are contractors, and they're looking for help.
And willing to pay for it.
We've recently raised our rates as a business to $90 an hour, and we are not pushing the envelope. We were 75 a little while ago and 65 a little while before that. It's getting to the point where you probably pay us more to come fix your light switch than you do to go to the doctor.
So again, why no takers?
I do think for people my age, it's definitely more glamorous to think of the tech job where you're in a really nice, cushy office building. We're the kind of people who are gonna hire someone to go change a light bulb, let alone go into the trades. That's kind of where my generation is right now.
I can't give them a power tool. They may kill themselves with it. They've never held a power tool in their life.
Yes, says Detroit master plumber Adrian Bennett, whose firm is currently helping to revitalize Michigan Central Station, it takes a non-cushy mindset.
This is physical work. You need to be there on your job site every day, and you got to be on time. And a lot of the young people today, they don't have work ethics.
But of course, plenty do. Determined to breed new plumbers, Vinny Spazzari runs his own year-long training program.
And then there's many options that you can provide.
Paying young people from the get-go to learn the trade.
We're paying our trainees $15, $16, $18 an hour. And then when you're done with the program, you're not a full licensed plumber, but you're a service technician who's able to snake drains and to do the kind of small plumbing repairs and whatnot and get close to that six-figure income. You're getting paid to learn that.
After a certain number of hours and possibly an exam, the requirements vary by locality, you can become a licensed plumber, a quality credential in an economy where only 11% of employers think colleges and universities are doing a good job of preparing people for the workforce.
Tighten everything before you hang that up there.
Says Spazzari of his apprenticeship program.
It's open for everybody. I would welcome anybody.
But says Spazzari,
you'd be amazed at how many people we want to hire, but our insurance company won't insure them because of driving violation, drugs, can't keep a job. You see some applicants come in here in a ripped t-shirt, hasn't shaved. You go out and look at his car and it's full of garbage. It hasn't been washed in a month. Those are the things we look at.
But hey, plenty of young folks have intact t-shirts, clean faces, clean cars. Maybe they realize or learn that you need an apprenticeship to get licensed, says plumber Adrian Bennett.
And the apprenticeships are 5 years. And you start out at maybe $15, $16 an hour. And to get to that $40, $50 an hour, it's going to take you 5 or 6 years.
Plus, to get a job, isn't it who you know? And few potential candidates know tradespeople, it seems.
I didn't knew nobody.
Manuel Rios, a Mr. Rooter trainee, used to work on electric motors for $18 an hour with little prospect of making much more. But by chance, he met some plumbers there.
They said that they make a lot of money, and I realized that the plumbing is never gonna end because you're always gonna need a plumber. So the business is always gonna be there.
It's not resetting.
The final barrier to entry in the trades is a familiar one, says electrician Lamort.
There's a certain feeling that it's kind of like a white man's game, I hate to say it. So people who are LGBTQ, minorities, are a little bit intimidated by the boys club that exists.
And of course, women. Added together, that's about 2/3 of the country. In the late 1970s, Adrian Bennett was recruited as a union plumbing apprentice under a federal program targeting women. Similar programs exist today.
This is something that will keep food on the table. It will keep clothes on your back. It'll keep a roof over your head. I'm living proof.
Living proof as CEO of her own industrial contracting plumbing business since 2008. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Salman.
There is a
Sorry
shortage.
about that. All right, go back into the presentation. Sorry about that. Almost back in the presentation. All right. All right, so we're gonna unpack that video as we move forward with our discussion.
There is a shortage.
It wants to play again. Okay. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Welton as we're going to kind of go a little bit more specifically into the refresher based on the different sections of the CLNA.
Thank you, Marcy. And as Marcy stated earlier, the CLNA is a collaborative process, right? This should hopefully give you an opportunity to, this is not something you do alone as a Perkins administrator, right? You should be connecting to other faculty, staff, industry partners to work through this process collaboratively. And there was a question in the chat, what do we mean by a first completion cycle? So when this, when we released the CLNA process back in, what was it, fall 2019? Marcy, all of you were to go forth and start your first round of engaging in the various steps of the CLNA. Of course, the pandemic came along, right, and kind of interrupted that process, but hopefully you have already had an opportunity to at least walk through one cycle of this process. And so it's really a cycle of inquiry. So once you go through all the first 8 steps, you can, recalibrate and go through it all over again, right? It's never ending. It's a continuous improvement process. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, Marcy showed the video of our new normal, right? Our new normal of CTE programs in this, we're still in a pandemic. And so as I'm revisiting each of the 8 steps of the CLNA, I really want you to think about what do these steps look like now that we're in a pandemic and we need to revisit what the labor market needs are. That video, the employers talked about what are some of the gaps in the labor market, what are some of the skill set gaps. And so really looking at the CLNA process through a fresh set of eyes based on our experiences in the pandemic. So step 1 is thinking about your progress towards equity and access. So the CLNA process is really examining your CTE programs through an equity lens. And it pushes you to address whether and how equity is systemically and systematically embedded in all aspects of your CTE programs, your structures, your resources, materials, curricula, and pedagogy and practices. And so when you're assessing your CTE programs through an equity lens, you're asking questions for this first step. You're asking questions such as, who is trying to gain access to our programs but can't, and why? Especially in this, in the pandemic, how has this pandemic impacted who is able to access your CTE programs? What subpopulations and perspectives are being considered, and who is left out in the program design? In that video, someone mentioned that folks of LGBTQ identities or folks of color may not see themselves in certain industries. And so who is left out and why? What conditions have you created for equitable access and success? And what conditions may be hindering certain subpopulations? So thinking about how the pandemic has affected certain subpopulations accessing your CTE programs. And so in this section, some questions to ask: to what extent are your programs representative of your district's demographics and the shifts in diversity in your district in terms of race, age, gender, SES, English language learners, or disability? What populations could perhaps be underrepresented in your CTE programs? And what efforts have you made in terms of recruitment for certain student populations? And the pandemic has unfortunately further disconnected us. So thinking about what are some new ways in which you'll have to connect to certain populations that have traditionally been underrepresented in certain CTE programs. And then also, what efforts have you made to help certain subpopulations transition to CTE, such as racially minoritized students, English language learners, students with disabilities, adult education, students who have been placed in developmental education, and other sub-POPs according to Perkins 5. You can go on to the next slide, Marcy. Section 2 is taking a look at student performance. And so this section will help you evaluate your student performance on federal, state, and local measures and identify any equity gaps, right? You're really looking, the CLNA helps you take a look at equity gaps in student performance based on this data. And you're looking at data not only in the aggregate, but you're also disaggregating that data based on your subpopulations as defined by Perkins 5 and also the workforce innovation and opportunity gap. And the disaggregated data allows you and your participating stakeholders to identify gaps amongst those subpopulations. And so, of course, there's guiding questions in this section where you can dig deeper and uncover racial equity gaps in the data. Because research has shown that we often don't take a look at the racial equity gaps and focus on race, and we instead look at issues like of SES, but really, we really need to center race because as data has shown in terms of the state of Illinois, racial equity gaps are probably some of our biggest gaps. And so in this area, some questions to ask is what equity gaps were identified for students in CTE programs in high demand sectors, right? We want to make sure that we're creating pathways for certain student populations to get access to high demand sectors. What equity gaps were identified for students in CTE programs for high wage sectors? And based on these equity gaps you've identified, what CTE programs should you prioritize to develop structure, supports, and practices that improve student performance and outcomes? And also, how has the pandemic impacted what types of data and assessments that you have available? It's also something to consider. Okay, you can move on, Marcy. Okay. All right, section 3 is talking about the recruitment, retention, and training of CTE educators. And so this section should help you evaluate current and future recruitment and retention and any professional development needs with both an equity and culture responsive lens. And so in terms of equity, considering how you are recruiting faculty members from underrepresented groups, and if they are reflective of a diversity of the student population and your regional and local context. And so one way, I mean, the research shows that one way to recruit student populations from minoritized groups is to have a faculty and staff that reflects their identity. So this section helps walk you through a series of questions to help you think about what types of gaps in terms of representation do you have amongst your CTE faculty and staff. So has your institution engaged employers in the recruitment of CTE faculty? I mean, I just think that video, case in point, you had a Black woman who owns her own plumbing business. So working with local employers to see if you could tap into them to be, to represent help with recruitment for CTE faculty. And what programs of study do you need to recruit and develop more educators? And what are some strategies you have already begun to implement towards this effort? What supports do you need to provide to transition industry professionals to the role of teaching, right? They've never taken courses on pedagogy or instruction. So what kinds of professional learning and development do you need to provide industry partners who are now transitioning into becoming faculty? Can move on to section 4. And then of course, again, the CLNA is all about going through this cycle of inquiry, this continuous improvement process in collaboration with others. So you shouldn't be doing this alone as a Perkins administrator. You should be doing this with other stakeholders and have a group of stakeholders who help you walk through this CLNA process. So some stakeholders to consider are representatives of your career and technical education programs, in a local educational agency or educational service agency, including teachers, career guidance and academic counselors, principals and other school leaders, administrators, and specialized instructional support personnel and paraprofessionals, representatives of career and tech ed programs at post-secondary ed institutions, including faculty and administrators, representatives, of course, from your state board or local workforce development boards, and a range of local or regional businesses or industries, families and students, having student representatives, and of course, representatives from your special populations. And I think this step 5 is especially important, considering how the pandemic has really shifted labor market needs. Also, in terms of what labor markets have gotten a boost because of the pandemic as well. So this is a time to really take stock of how the pandemic has affected the labor market. So using the guiding questions in the CLNA, you consider how your programs align with state, regional, and or local labor market needs and demands. Of course, using your stakeholders on your team to assist you in looking, using the CLNA for current and projected labor market needs and trends. And again, stakeholders from local workforce development boards, chambers of commerce, your unions, industry associations are especially important to include. And if you've collected any surveys, exit interviews from alumni to help you understand their experiences in your programs and preparing them for the workforce is also helpful. Okay. And then section 6 is looking at program size, scope, and quality. And we recommend, of course, that you look at the state definitions of size, scope, and quality. And Perkins 5 requires you to assess whether the number of programs or programs of study and courses you offer meet the needs of your student population. And especially considering the pandemic, it's important to take stock and examine the size, scope, and quality of your programs. And in terms of assessment of size, you're looking at class size in addition to the availability of program resources, such as facilities and equipment. And I'm sure, the facilities and equipment has become quite an issue in the pandemic, and rethinking about how to, offer your CTE programs in person now that we're returning to in-person learning. And what does that mean for equipment and facilities? In terms of scope, you can consider whether program curricular offerings are seamlessly aligned with the subsequent level of education. And then for quality purposes, assess the extent to which your programs give students the knowledge and skills and critical thinking skills to gain employment. Okay. And then section 7 is progress towards implementing programs of study. And in this section, you're examining, according to Perkins 5, whether your programs of study at the post-secondary level are coordinated, non-duplicative sequence of academic and technical content. And this portion of the CLNA will require you to do some backward and forward mapping of your programs of study offerings to determine, again, whether or not they meet labor market projections. So given in the pandemic, taking a look at your programs of study and what you do and do not offer, and whether or not that meets the demands of the current, I don't know, we're not in post-pandemic, we're in the midst of ongoing new normal pandemic labor market. And then finally, the question that was asked in the chat, how should I have been doing this? How long should I have been doing this CLNA process? Well, it's an ongoing, continuous cycle of inquiry. So what we do suggest is every 6 months, walk through these 8 stages and revisit your programs of study, revisit your labor market trends, revisit your data, and meet with your stakeholders every 6 months. But it's a continuous improvement process.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Welton.
Yeah.
Okay. So as AJ mentioned, throughout breaking down each section, there's so many different intersecting components to take into consideration, particularly given the climate that we're all experiencing currently. So some things that we want to be thinking about in the back of our mind as we get ready to contribute and talk amongst one another in breakout rooms, and I'll explain that in a minute, are some of these foundational questions, again, centered on equity. So one of the questions we pose here, something for you to brainstorm again before we break you out into breakout groups, is how are the issues and challenges featured in the video that we saw just a few minutes ago, how are those playing out at the local level? Another question for you to ponder, what could you do during the CLNA process to engage partners in committing to action towards overcoming these challenges? And what changes need to occur so that in your local context to advance the equity for Black, Latinx, low income, rural, and working adult populations? So there's quite a bit to chew there, to take off and digest, but we are hopeful that as we go into breakout rooms, and I'll share that slide with you next, and I'll explain kind of the rules of the game, that you're able to think about those different contexts and how they intersect and how it also parallels with the work you'll be doing for the CLNA. So what we're going to do for the breakout rooms, and now actually is a great time for you to find yourself in the participant section and rename yourself if your name isn't listed, so folks know you by first and last name if you feel comfortable putting both on there. Is that we're going to divide you up using the state of Illinois map. So depending on what community college you're working at currently or you're Perkins 5 administrator for, we'll break you into 3 different breakout groups, and you'll want to make sure a couple things. That your participant name is clear for folks to see, that you choose the correct breakout room based on the map, which I'll show you here in a moment, but also that you are making sure someone in the group is a scribe or someone's taking some notes down, because at the end, we definitely want to make sure that we are able to report out and kind of share across what our experiences are in these different districts and then at your college specifically. Okay. All right, I will send to everyone the breakout questions. And I actually have 2 formats for you because I think sometimes it shows a little bit better in a JPEG file depending on what kind of computer you're using. And I will also send you a Word doc because sometimes it works better that way too. So we'll make sure everybody has that. So those are going out to you in the chat box. You have them for your groups. You can see here, group 1 is the northeast section up here, and actually AJ, Dr. Welton will take that group, so she'll be breaking out with you in that section group there. I'll be taking group 2, so that's the Parkland College area. We've got some Heartland folks there, and then group 3, Dr. Rocky will break out with all of you there. So you'll notice down by the breakout rooms, you probably are all pros by now, but you are able to add yourself to those breakout rooms. We will give you approximately 30 minutes to chat amongst yourselves, and then we will bring you all back to the group. So feel free to join your group now. Well, without further ado, I know in our group, we had some very fruitful conversations about different innovative outside of the box thinking in terms of recruiting students, but also in terms of recruiting CTE faculty. So we spent a significant amount of time talking about that. I can imagine that probably popped up in some of the other groups as well. But let's go ahead and have folks share out from different groups. Is there anyone who would like to report out on what they discussed in their group related to the questions sent in the chat or something else that you stumbled upon during this process?
I'll go first. So the fall of 2019 was my first experience with Perkins, and I was very excited to jump into the CLNA feet first. One of the takeaways we had was looking at ways in which we could retain our non-traditional students and just a lot of our special population students in general. And so our goal in our Perkins plan was to create a mentorship program for those individuals, which was a little challenging in the middle of COVID, so it didn't quite take off like we had hoped. So this past year, we've worked with our foundation and found some funding from a local education foundation to support a mentorship program for students. And so we are starting a pilot for that this fall to see how it goes. Students will have some extra activities on campus. They'll be paired with a staff member. We requested participation from staff and faculty on a volunteer basis to serve as mentors, and received quite a few volunteers to take part in that. And each mentor is paired with about 4 or 5 different mentees that meet regularly. They also use a course within Moodle to have discussion posts, share their calendars for their meetups, and make sure we have monitored discussion within those groups. And we're also looking at a texting platform that's also monitored by the college that they can utilize. So we're hoping to see success with this program. And if it is, we're hoping to expand that to the other areas throughout CTE as well.
Thank you for sharing. All right, other groups.
I think from our group, this is Jonita Ellis. One of the common themes was using existing reports and support services and doing this and not reinventing the wheel, using the resources from your one-stop center, using your college's strategic plan, if you have an equity plan, if there's the adult education plan, and really using a lot of the information that's taking that so you're not reinventing the wheel. That was just one theme.
Yeah, I'll bet it makes things seem a little bit more digestible as well with the reports.
Christina was our note taker in group 3. I don't know if you want to share our highlights.
So we were talking about, our primary action steps, and we were discussing probably the problems that we had around with engaging stakeholders because of the PAC and turnovers and staff and so forth. So I think that people are going to be a little creative about how they're going to engage the stakeholders this time around. And then we also had discussion very similar to what Joni was saying, was kind of highlighting the things that came out of the pandemic, the things that we put into place to help students, maybe those laptop learner programs and so forth. And we discussed the trends that we're seeing. At first was the technology issue.
I think Christina cut out.
Yeah, I think we might have lost her. I think she might have fallen off of Zoom, this lovely Zoom.
I don't know if anybody else from group 3 wants to jump in. I was in there too, but I said I was a primary sharer.
It hasn't happened to me all day till I start talking like that. And then we did talk about the things that came out of it as far as, I think if Kim wants to talk about it, maybe she won't lose it, but the volunteer program we have with calling students. Okay, well, anyway, what we do is break it out to several different people around campus to volunteer and call in and do check-ins, just kind of assess the career you're having, and then kind of assigning them to like RL cares or health and wellness and so forth.
Thanks. Yeah, I know you cut out a little bit. She was highlighting the work that they do and personally calling students, right? So the approach of where they divide it up, and even though that's very like time and staff intensive, Run Lake had shared the ways that they had actually created a spreadsheet and were doing these personal outreach calls to figure out, you know, root causes and what issues students were struggling with, and then also making note of that, right? So they had kind of a document, and then they were recording like how they were helping those students. So it became a resource.
What a wonderful idea, especially given, and I'm sure all the groups discuss this too, just the current context everybody's working in, especially with, in group 3, we talked a lot about recruiting CTE faculty and what does that mean to continue your partnerships with CTE community members who are already really busy and they're, you know, overloaded with filling positions and keeping people working or refilling positions. So it was very much interrelated to continuing those strong relationships, but at the same time acknowledging that maybe the same way that they showed up before at a meeting isn't going to look the same way, and being creative with our approaches to make sure we're keeping those connections and getting students to where they desire to be while also recruiting them simultaneously.
Yeah, the move to virtual actually came up as sort of an opportunity with our group, because they reported, some of them said they'd had a lot more employer engagement, even stakeholder participation in meetings, because they became more accessible through technology, or even had various time options. So that was a theme for students, but also kind of created an opportunity where some colleges saw increased participation.
Nice.
In some of their meetings that they were having with, you know, employers or other stakeholders, because it just kind of created a way to participate, right? That sometimes makes it a little bit easier than having to travel. I would say, especially with our group, there's several of the colleges that cover such large areas geographically and can be largely rural. And so I think that can be a challenge when you think about distance or time for people to engage in meetings.
Absolutely. I have a question for all of you out there in the audience. Did anything come up related to different forms of meeting students where they're at? So I know in our group, someone said, well, maybe the marketing for finding high school students should look different. And so we threw around the idea, or someone was joking about TikTok or Snapchat or anything like that. Is anybody using those platforms currently to reach their partners or to reach students or recruit students at all?
This is Carrie at Richland. We have everything except TikTok already, and I know they're looking into that.
Interesting. Okay, tell us a little bit more about that. Are you using it as a way to let students know about programs or events, or?
Yeah, it's ran through our marketing department. So they administer a ton of Facebook pages, and then kind of have like general Richland ones. But mostly, yeah, to let them know about events like registration, anything fun, stuff like that. We know, so we use Canvas as our LMS. Most faculty use that to communicate things to their students, but a lot of our students don't even know that they have a separate email as well. So nor do they really even check either, but you know, as a whole, they mostly check Canvas too. So really trying to meet them exactly where they're at in the platforms they're on.
Nice.
This is not novel, but we do a lot of Facebook geo-targeting where, you know,
Something to add on to that our marketing department has talked about is, I guess the privacy laws are changing around Facebook and quite a few other of those platforms that doesn't let us geo-target as much. So I don't know the intricacies, but I know that they're pretty big deal for our marketing department.
Oakton Community College uses YouTube. We have a channel that we post a lot of videos to, specifically for each division, or for like Trio, they have a channel that If they're offering workshops that a student can't attend in person, then those workshops are then uploaded to that YouTube channel. Admissions and enrollment services also has a page. Financial aid also has resources on that YouTube channel where, you know, students can access it at their own leisure.
That's fantastic.
Here at Spoon River College, we use a lot of the ones that everybody has mentioned, but I did want to throw out, there's a college on the East Coast called Cape Fear Community College, and they do an absolutely amazing job with TikTok. So if anybody is looking at that or interested in that, I recommend that you take a look at their account because they do a fantastic job.
I hadn't thought about using TikTok for this sort of CTE reach out or Perkins, but I know somebody on our marketing team has been playing around with using TikTok to encourage students to get vaccinated. And so has our local health department. And so I don't think it's going to die out. I do think students are on TikTok probably more than Facebook or if you want to reach someone on Facebook, you're going to reach someone like me. And that's not who we're trying to reach.
That's Heather, that's an interesting thing when you were talking about sort of the partnership, right, with your health department, because one of the things that I had asked in our group and I was just curious about was, the ways in which community colleges might be serving their district differently because of the pandemic. So when we think about like vaccination clinics, we think about testing sites, and I guess the extent to which there might have been new relationships created either with, different organizations that you may not have partnered with before in your community, but also with district residents, right? So people that might have been coming to the campus for things that had nothing to do maybe with attending classes, but how moving forward, I guess what people learn from that or how you can leverage that. So that's something that I was kind of curious about because again, I know particularly community colleges have been serving their districts, right, which they always do, right, well beyond necessarily simply, but right, like the traditional way. But being a community resource for people in your district that are not enrolled as students. So just any opportunities that might have come out of the pandemic.
Something that never came to fruition, but I thought was a great idea, and maybe it still will, is so in Winnebago County, they had a mobile vaccination unit that was a bus, and Rock Valley College has a tech bus. And I did make connections through the pandemic with someone in communications at the health department, and we kept talking about how we could partner these two buses and probably serve some of the same communities of need. Some of the same communities that were struggling with getting people vaccinated are probably the same communities that need information about education, whether it's adult education, CTE, or any type of programmings we might offer at community colleges. So I don't know if there's still, something we can do there, but it was a really exciting idea to me.
I don't know if this was already mentioned. I was trying to focus on downloading the files that were sent to me. But in terms of like leveraging, resources that you have at your disposal, the group that I was in mentioned, instead of reinventing the wheel with the CLNA, look at what tools that you're using to get a stock of, the equity gaps in your college. What tools that you're already using that are similar to the types of questions that the CLNA is asking you. So there may be strategic plan processes that you're already engaging in where you're collecting data from that. So yeah, that was a great idea to not reinvent the wheel and look at what resources and data collection, information gathering tools that you're already using that are asking similar questions as the CLNA.
Yeah, that was something that, because it is, someone sort of pointing out it's a very heavy lift when they already feel like, and in our group, there'd been a lot of institutions that experienced turnover, right? Or this came up like transition between who did Perkins before, or right, disrupted in the first round of completing this. And so maybe didn't have a whole lot to go off of, or that everything there is now kind of a moot point because of the impact of the pandemic. And so one thing that I brought up, because it crosses over with the projects that we do at OCCRL, and it's come up with our program review advisory committee, and Jonita kind of was speaking to this, but like your program review process, right? So when you do program review, you should be sharing that, right? So, and kind of giving the example of the equity gaps that you see in one CTE program may well resonate, right, with the gaps that you see in another CTE program. And so how can you look at those reviews to inform what's happening in your overall CTE program, right? That doesn't require you to necessarily collect a new way of collecting something, but what do you see across program reviews? And even, where do you see programs that maybe are closing equity gaps, and what are they doing? And how might you scale that? So I think program review as a resource, and again, the importance, right, of something that again has come up in the things we do, where program review can be sort of a roadmap for the person coming in after you. So with your CLNA, even like how helpful is it to have something that, as Dr. Welton talked about, this every 6-month check-in, that someone should be able to walk in and say, oh, here's where they were at, right? Or here's where we were trying to make progress. So the value of that. And that, yes, as we've said, collaborative. This should be collaborative. This shouldn't be one person in a room answering questions. So.
In my group, I heard some great examples of ways in which they are making it collaborative and engaging, especially with secondary ed partners. And again, as it was brought up, it seems that the virtual aspect has enabled them to engage with their secondary partners. I don't know if anyone wants to share some from the group that I was in, some of the tips that they were using to engage their secondary partners in this process.
It wasn't being done at COD, but we're going to look into it. But having advisory committees with their high schools. So having one advisory committee for automotive, as opposed to having 2 separate advisory committees. I mean, I think that's an excellent example. That's something that, I really want to try to share that more with our CTE chairs, because I think there is a disconnect with having separate advisory committees if we each have a program of study, because they're separate processes, but the advisory committee function should be the same across both institutions. So I thought that was, there's more than one school that's doing that now, but I was glad to hear that they were having success with that.
I've had some high schools ask if we would be open to doing that, but I already have some concerns because we try to keep our meetings to an hour and a half, because it seems like after the hour and a half, we lose people. And I also don't want to be restrictive or exclusive just to working with 1 or 2 different high schools if we represent multiple high schools. So I'm kind of curious how others do that, if they are doing that with the high schools. Do you invite all of them, or just kind of work with your CTE director at the ROE level? How does that look?
This is Allison from Wabansie. So I frequently send the invite to the EFE director, and then sometimes she will be the person that attends the meeting, or she will share it with key faculty, like high school teachers or administrators. So that way we don't have 10 high school participants, but they at least have a representative. And so we also try, I will say our meetings tend to be post-secondary focused, but if I know folks from secondary are coming, then I'll make sure to add it on the agenda that, what are the updates from our secondary partners. And so I feel like too, sometimes depending on how what the familiarity or the previous collaboration efforts between those secondary and post-secondary faculty. Some of our secondary faculty feel really comfortable to like interject during the conversation. So sometimes it's, they're just it's just one more person, another part of the gang that's just, contributing to the conversation. So we never schedule our meetings more than 90 minutes. So we've found that it's pretty doable most times.
This is Joanne at Harper. We also invite our high school partners, and what we do is we have an agenda that our high school, and so that we can keep it to the allotted time. And and we don't have every high school representative. What we have is a district representative that represents from Nexus, who represents all the high schools. And then there is I'll give an example for manufacturing. There is the chair of the high school chair for the manufacturing and welding team that serves on the committee, and the district reaches out to get agenda items that are to be addressed. So that way we can stick directly to the time period and we can cover all of the information. And if we are looking to review curriculum or whatever we are doing, then that also provides them with an opportunity to provide input into any curriculum changes that we're doing as well.
Any other report outs from the groups? All right. Well, I don't see any virtual hands. I want to thank you all for taking the time to meet with us today and to review the CLNA process, but also to collaborate with one another. Before we close out this session, are there any questions for us while you have our full attention?
I see a question in the chat about when we'll need to submit our next CLNA, and that I would say ICCB. I would defer to them.
It'll be due with your local with your Perkins application for FY23.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I haven't seen any more questions come through. Thank you, Marcy, and thank you, Dr. Welton. Unless Marcy has something else to add, we're free to hand it over to Janelle, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So I see a question about the CLNA form being available. And yes, it is available on the OCCRL website as well as the Illinois Community College Board website. So thanks, Dr. Welton shared the website. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now.
All right, well, thanks so much to the OCCRL team. It was great having you all today for this very timely conversation. And I would note that OCCRL will be providing additional technical assistance around the CLNA, and the opportunities for those will be announced here soon. So be on the lookout for that.
Thank you. Look forward to continuing to work with you all.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand. This is the City College's district office, and we have a question about the form or the template. Are we just doing revisions to our prior CLNA and marking those, or are we completing a whole new one? Janelle, is that a question for you?
I would
Sorry.
be, oh, sorry, go ahead, Janelle.
No, go ahead.
Well, I guess I would say that would be probably like an ICCB related question, but I also think, you know, again, those 6-month, 12-month, 18-month, like hopefully you can, you know, look back at what you did. Again, similarly to what we see a lot where we think about if you have an annual process for program review, right? Sort of like it's a living, breathing document. But I think that sort of guides continuous improvement. But I would say the formal answer to that question would come from ICCB.
Yeah, sorry. So yes, again, it will be a review. I guess you just, you know, go through and see what areas need updated. And again, I think in our future TA sessions, we'll have a definite answer on what areas have to be updated for sure. But I don't know that we've actually discussed if it's going to be the whole process. So I am sorry, and I will follow up on what areas will definitely have to be resubmitted. But again, a review and definitely updating with current information and revisiting. All right, so it looks like we are going to be able to give back some time, unless there are other questions.
I did want to hop on real quick and just remind everybody that the Forum for Excellence officially kicks off tomorrow. So we start tomorrow at 9 a.m., hopefully from the comfort of your home, but it looks like a lot of you are also in your office too. So wherever you find yourself, be sure to log in. If you have any questions, I'm hoping that you have seen my email or Amy's email or the ICSPS email address enough that you know who to contact for accessing Whova and all of the wonderful things that go with the forum. So I look forward to seeing you all again virtually Thursday and Friday.
Everyone.